Picture this. You're about to be born into one of the most brutal eras in Earth's history. The year is roughly 2 million BC, and the world is a frozen wasteland that makes Antarctica look like a tropical vacation. You're not going to be some cuddly house cat lounging in a sunbeam. No, you're about to enter the world as one of nature's most feared predators, a saber-toothed cat. And let me tell you something right off the bat. Being born with those iconic fangs wasn't the blessing you might think it was. See, Hollywood has sold us this image of saber-toothed tigers as these unstoppable killing machines, prowling the Ice Age landscape like prehistoric gods. But the reality, your life as a saber-tooth was going to be one endless struggle against starvation, brutal competition, and evolutionary dead ends that would make a modern tiger weep. By the end of this series, you'll understand exactly why these magnificent beasts couldn't adapt fast enough to survive, and why every single day of their existence was a fight against extinction. But first, let me paint you a picture of what you're walking into. The world you're about to be born into is locked in an ice age so severe that most of North America is buried under glaciers thicker than skyscrapers. The temperature rarely climbs above freezing, and food is about as scarce as Wi-Fi in the Stone Age. Your parents aren't going to coddle you, and nature sure as hell isn't going to give you any participation trophies. Now, before we dive into your miserable existence as a saber-tooth cub, I need to shatter some myths that have been floating around for decades. First off, you're not actually a tiger. Despite what everyone calls you, saber-toothed tigers weren't tigers at all. You're more closely related to modern leopards and jaguars than you are to tigers, those massive canine teeth that define your species. They're not built for the kind of hunting you see in nature documentaries. In fact, they're going to cause you more problems than you can imagine. Here's something that's going to blow your mind. Those famous saber teeth of yours are essentially glass cannons. Sure, they look intimidating as hell, but they're incredibly fragile. One wrong bite, one awkward angle, and you could snap those teeth clean off. And guess what happens then? You starve to death. There's no dental plan in the Pleistocene era, friend. Break your primary hunting tools, and you're basically signing your own death certificate. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start at the very beginning of your nightmare. You enter this world completely helpless. I'm talking Helen Keller levels of sensory deprivation here. You can't see, you can't hear properly, and you're about as coordinated as a drunk penguin on roller skates. Your mother has just gone through an exhausting labor, and she's already stressed about finding enough food to produce the milk that's going to keep you alive. Unlike modern house cats who might have 4 to 6 kittens in a litter, saber-tooth mothers typically had only 2 or 3 cubs. Why? Because resources were so scarce that having more babies was basically a death sentence for the entire family. Your den is a cramped, freezing cave that offers minimal protection from the elements. There's no central heating, no cozy blankets, just the warmth of your mother's body, and maybe a sibling or two pressed against you in the darkness. Your world consists of sleeping, nursing, and trying not to freeze to death. It's not exactly the start to life you put on a postcard. Now, here's where things get really interesting. While you're stumbling around blind for your first week of life, your mother is facing a constant dilemma. She needs to hunt to maintain her strength and produce milk, but leaving you alone means risking your death from cold, predators, or simple abandonment. Sabertooth mothers didn't have the luxury of leaving their cubs with babysitters. If she goes out to hunt and doesn't come back, you're done. Game over. No respawn. When your eyes finally crack open after about a week, the first thing you're going to notice is how utterly disappointing your world looks. The den is dark, cramped, and smells like a combination of wet fur and whatever your mother managed to drag in for dinner last night. Your siblings, if you have any, are just as confused and helpless as you are. You're all competing for the same limited resources, which means your own family members are essentially your first rivals in the game of survival. Here's something that modern cat owners would find horrifying. Your mother isn't going to protect you from everything. If food becomes too scarce, if the winter gets too harsh, if you show signs of weakness or illness, there's a very real chance she might abandon you. It sounds cruel by today's standards, but in the Ice Age, sentimentality was a luxury that could get entire families killed. Your mother's primary goal isn't to make you happy. It's to ensure that at least some of her genetic material survives to see another generation. By the time you're a few weeks old, you're starting to develop some basic motor skills, but you're still completely dependent on your mother's milk. And here's the kicker, that milk isn't just nutrition. It's also your primary source of antibodies and immune system support. In a world filled with parasites, diseases, and infections that would make a medieval plague look like a mild cold, your immune system is basically held together with hope and maternal antibodies. Boy, the first major milestone in your miserable existence comes when you start developing those famous saber teeth. Now, you might think that this is when you start becoming the badass predator of legend. Wrong. Those teeth are initially more of a hindrance than a help. They're growing at different rates, they're incredibly sensitive, and they're constantly getting in the way of basic activities like eating and drinking. Imagine trying to nurse when you've got 2 railroad spikes growing out of your upper jaw. It's not exactly comfortable for anyone involved. Your mother, meanwhile, is dealing with her own set of problems. Those saber teeth that make her such an effective hunter also mean she has to be incredibly careful about how she feeds you. One wrong move and she could seriously injure you with her own fangs. It's like trying to spoon-feed a baby while wearing medieval armor. Technically possible, but fraught with danger. As you start to grow, you begin to understand just how harsh your environment really is. The Ice Age isn't just cold. It's a frozen hellscape where the margin for error is essentially zero. Food is scarce, competition is fierce, and the weather can kill you just as easily as any predator. Your parents aren't just hunting for sport or entertainment. Every hunting trip is a desperate attempt to stave off starvation for another day. The social dynamics of saber-tooth families would make a soap opera look tame. Your father, if he's still around, is dealing with constant pressure from other males trying to take over his territory. Your mother is balancing the needs of her current litter with her own survival instincts. And you and your siblings are learning that cooperation and competition often go hand in hand. You might work together to stay warm, but when food is involved, all bets are off. Here's something that really drives home how different your world is from modern domestic cats. Playtime isn't just fun and games. When you and your siblings wrestle and pounce on each other, you're literally practicing life or death skills. That playful swat at your brother's head, you're learning how to deliver killing blows. That mock stalking behavior, you're developing the patience and precision that will determine whether you eat or starve as an adult. The learning curve is steep, and failure isn't just embarrassing, it's fatal. You can't afford to be a slow learner in a world where your next meal depends on your ability to take down prey that's often larger, faster, and more desperate than you are. Your parents aren't going to give you endless chances to figure things out. Resources are too precious, and winter is always just around the corner. By the time you're a few months old, you're starting to accompany your parents on hunting trips. But you're essentially dead weight. You can't contribute to the kill. You can't carry your share of the meat, and you're constantly at risk of becoming someone else's dinner. You're learning through observation, but every lesson comes with the knowledge that a single mistake could end your bloodline. The psychological pressure of this existence is something we can barely comprehend today. You're not just learning to hunt. You're learning to live with the constant awareness that death is always one bad day away. Your first real hunting lesson comes when you're barely old enough to keep up with the pack. Dad decides it's time to show you what separating the wheat from the chaff really looks like. You're tagging along behind your parents, trying to look fierce, but mostly just trying not to trip over your own oversized paws. The target today is a ground sloth, a massive, lumbering creature that looks like someone crossed a bear with a walking carpet. Now, here's where things get educational in the worst possible way. You watch your father approach this thing, and you're thinking, okay, this should be straightforward. Big teeth, big prey, problem solved. But then you notice something that's going to haunt your hunting career for the rest of your short life. Those saber teeth of yours aren't designed for the kind of brutal, no-holds-barred fighting you see in nature documentaries. Your father has to be surgical in his approach. Those 8-inch canines aren't battering rams. They're precision instruments that require perfect positioning and incredible restraint. One overeager bite, one moment where he puts too much lateral pressure on those teeth, and his primary hunting tools become expensive ivory decorations scattered across the frozen ground. You watch as your parents execute what can only be described as prehistoric choreography. Your mother circles around to cut off escape routes while your father positions himself for that one perfect strike. But here's the thing that's going to keep you up at night. They can't just clamp down and hold on like modern big cats. Those saber teeth are so long and so fragile that they have to deliver precise, calculated bites to specific areas. It's like performing surgery with a broadsword while riding a mechanical bull. The ground sloth goes down, but not before giving you a master class in just how dangerous your future profession is going to be. These aren't the docile, slow-moving targets that Hollywood makes them out to be. Ground sloths have claws that can disembowel a saber-tooth with one swipe, and they're not particularly interested in becoming anyone's dinner without a fight. After the kill, you get your first taste of what survival really means in the Ice Age. There's no refrigeration, no way to preserve meat for extended periods. What your family doesn't eat immediately is going to rot, freeze solid, or get stolen by scavengers. You're learning that every successful hunt is followed by a frantic race against time, weather, and competition. But here's where your education takes a dark turn. You start to realize that your species has backed itself into an evolutionary corner. Those magnificent saber teeth that define your identity are simultaneously your greatest asset and your fatal weakness. They require your prey to be positioned just right. They limit the types of animals you can effectively hunt, and they turn every feeding session into a delicate balancing act. Modern big cats can adapt their hunting strategies based on available prey. Lions can take down everything from zebras to buffalo. Tigers can hunt alone or adjust their techniques based on circumstances. You're locked into a very specific hunting style that works brilliantly when conditions are perfect and fails catastrophically when they're not. As you grow older, you start to understand the mathematics of saber-tooth existence, and the numbers are not in your favor. Your hunting success rate needs to be incredibly high because the energy expenditure for each hunt is massive. You're carrying around a muscular, heavy-boned body that requires substantial calories to maintain. Those saber teeth add weight and create drag. Every failed hunt brings you closer to starvation. Your teenage years are when the real nightmare begins. You're old enough to hunt independently, but you haven't developed the experience needed for consistent success. This is the period when most young saber-tooths die, not from predators or disease, but from simple starvation. You're competing with adults who have years of experience, and the learning curve is written in the bones of your less fortunate cousins. The territory game becomes your obsession and your curse. You need a large hunting ground to support your caloric requirements. But every other saber-tooth in the area needs the same thing. The mathematics are brutal. There simply isn't enough prey to support the number of predators that the environment produces. You're not just hunting animals, you're hunting space, territory, and the right to exist. Here's something that would make modern conservationists weep. Saber-tooths were victims of their own success. During periods of abundant prey, saber-tooth populations would grow. But when climate shifts reduced prey populations, there were too many specialized predators chasing too few suitable targets. Your species was like a high-performance sports car trying to navigate city traffic. Impressive when conditions were ideal, but struggling when flexibility was required. The mating game adds another layer of complexity to your already complicated existence. Finding a mate isn't just about attraction or compatibility. It's about finding another saber-tooth who has successfully navigated the same impossible odds that you've faced. The pool of potential partners is constantly shrinking due to starvation, injury, and competition. When you do manage to find a mate and establish territory, you're essentially signing up for a full-time job with no vacation days, no sick leave, and a retirement plan that consists of being eaten by younger, stronger predators. Raising cubs means doubling or tripling your hunting requirements while simultaneously protecting territory from competitors who see your offspring as future threats to their own survival. The cubs you produce inherit the same evolutionary trap that you've been struggling with your entire life. They're born into a world that's becoming increasingly hostile to large predators, and they're equipped with hunting tools that are becoming less and less effective as prey animals evolve their own survival strategies. Your daily routine becomes a grinding cycle of hunt, eat, defend, repeat. There's no leisure time, no opportunity for the kind of social behaviors that make life enjoyable for modern cats. Every calorie you consume has to be earned through risk, effort, and luck. Every day you survive brings you closer to the inevitable moment when age, injury, or simple bad luck will end your participation in this brutal game. The psychological toll of this existence is something we can barely comprehend. You're living with the constant knowledge that you're part of a dying breed, pursuing an evolutionary strategy that's becoming less viable with each passing generation. The very traits that made your ancestors successful are becoming liabilities in a changing world. But the worst part? You don't know that you're living through the twilight of your species. You can't see the bigger picture, can't understand that climate change and human expansion are creating pressures that no amount of individual excellence can overcome. You're fighting a war that was lost before you were born, using weapons that are becoming obsolete in a world that no longer has room for your particular brand of magnificence. The social isolation hits different when you're a saber-tooth. Unlike the pride dynamics of lions or the family structures of modern big cats, your species operates on a brutal, every-cat-for-themselves mentality that would make a Wall Street trader look compassionate. Once you've been kicked out of the family den, you're essentially a lone wolf situation, except you're a massive predator with fragile teeth in a world that's actively trying to kill you. Your first winter alone is when reality really sets in. You've got to maintain a core body temperature in conditions that would make an Eskimo reach for extra blankets. And you're doing it on whatever scraps you can manage to catch. The math is simple and terrifying. You need roughly 15 to 20 pounds of meat per day just to maintain your body weight. Miss a few meals, and your body starts eating itself from the inside out. Here's where things get really twisted. Your hunting strategy is so specialized that you can't just switch prey types when your preferred targets become scarce. Modern predators have options. When zebras are hard to find, lions can go after wildebeest or even scavenge from other kills. You're locked into hunting specific types of large, slow-moving prey that position their necks just right for those ridiculous fangs of yours. The irony is crushing. You're carrying around the most impressive weaponry in the prehistoric world, but they're about as practical as bringing a Formula One car to a monster truck rally. Those saber teeth look incredible, but they've turned you into the ultimate specialist in a world that increasingly rewards generalists. Your hunting technique becomes an exercise in frustration that would drive a Zen master to violence. You have to stalk your prey with the patience of a saint, wait for the perfect positioning, and then deliver a kill strike that requires the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. 1 degree off, and you either miss entirely or risk shattering your primary hunting tools on bone. Meanwhile, every other predator in your ecosystem is adapting and evolving. The dire wolves are developing pack hunting strategies that let them take down massive prey through coordination. The cave bears are becoming more efficient scavengers. Even the smaller cats are finding niches that don't require them to carry around 8-inch dental accessories that break if you look at them wrong. The worst part about your predicament is that you're aware something is fundamentally wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is. Your instincts are telling you to hunt in ways that worked for your ancestors, but the world has shifted just enough that those techniques are becoming less effective with each passing season. Climate change is happening on a scale that makes modern global warming look like a minor temperature adjustment. The ice sheets are advancing and retreating, completely reshaping the landscape every few thousand years. Prey animals are migrating to new areas, evolving different behaviors, and generally refusing to cooperate with your highly specialized hunting requirements. Your prey is getting smarter, faster, and more alert. Ground sloths are developing better early warning systems. Mastodons are traveling in tighter groups with better defensive formations. Even the smaller herbivores are becoming more skittish and harder to approach. It's like everyone got the memo about saber-tooth hunting techniques, except you, and they're all taking countermeasures. The energy economics of your existence become increasingly brutal as you age. Your body is a high-performance machine that requires premium fuel, but you're trying to run it on whatever scraps you can manage to catch. Each failed hunt doesn't just mean you go hungry. It means you're burning precious calories that you can't afford to waste, bringing you closer to the point where your body starts cannibalizing its own muscle mass. Your territorial requirements are massive compared to other predators. A modern tiger might need 20 to 30 square miles of territory. You need significantly more because your prey density requirements are so specific. You can't just hunt anything that moves. You need large, slow-moving targets that are positioned correctly for your ridiculous dental situation. Territory disputes with other saber-tooths become increasingly common as suitable hunting grounds become scarce. These aren't the ritualized dominance displays you see in modern big cats. These are brutal, no-holds-barred fights where one wrong move can shatter those precious saber teeth and effectively end your hunting career. Every territorial challenge becomes a high-stakes gamble with your survival tools as collateral. The loneliness is perhaps the most underestimated aspect of saber-tooth existence. You're not built for the kind of social structures that help other predators survive lean times. You can't form hunting partnerships or share kills with others of your kind. You're essentially playing the survival game in hardcore mode while everyone else gets to use cooperative multiplayer strategies. Your reproductive strategy becomes another source of stress that modern animals don't face. Finding a mate requires you to temporarily share territory with another apex predator who has the same caloric requirements and hunting limitations that you do. It's like trying to run two high-maintenance sports cars on a single tank of gas. Theoretically possible, but practically a nightmare. When you do manage to reproduce, the mathematics become even more impossible. You're not just supporting yourself anymore. You're supporting a mate and potentially multiple offspring, all of whom need substantial amounts of high-quality protein to survive. Your hunting success rate needs to be absolutely perfect, when failure means watching your genetic legacy starve to death. The cubs you produce inherit your evolutionary curse, but they're born into a world that's even less accommodating than the one you grew up in. Each generation faces slightly worse conditions, slightly more competition, and slightly less suitable prey. You're essentially passing on a genetic lottery ticket for a jackpot that's getting smaller every year. Your parenting strategy has to balance teaching essential survival skills with the harsh reality that most of your offspring won't make it to adulthood. You can't afford to invest too much emotional energy in any single cub, but you also can't afford to not try your absolute best to give them the skills they'll need. It's a psychological tightrope walk that would break most modern parents. The seasonal cycles become your enemy in ways that other predators don't experience. Winter means your prey animals are either migrating away, hibernating, or dying off from cold and starvation. Spring means competition from newly awakened predators and the energy demands of mating season. Summer means fighting other saber-tooths for the best territories. Fall means desperately trying to build up fat reserves for the coming winter. Your body starts betraying you earlier than it should. Those massive muscles that make you such an effective hunter also require constant maintenance that becomes harder to provide as prey becomes scarcer. Your joints start wearing out from the stress of carrying around all that weaponry. Your teeth, if you haven't broken them already, start developing stress fractures from years of precision strikes. The younger generation of saber-tooths coming up behind you are facing even worse conditions, which means they're hungrier, more desperate, and more willing to challenge established adults for territory. You're not just fighting the environment anymore. You're fighting your own species' population pressure in a world that can support fewer and fewer large predators. Your hunting grounds start showing signs of overuse. The prey animals that remain become increasingly wary and difficult to approach. The easy targets have already been eliminated by you and your competitors, leaving only the fastest, smartest, and most alert individuals. Your success rate drops while your energy requirements remain constant. The psychological pressure of constant failure starts wearing on you in ways that would be familiar to anyone who's experienced chronic stress. Your sleep patterns become erratic as you try to maximize hunting time. Your decision-making becomes increasingly desperate as hunger affects your judgment. You start taking risks that your younger, better-fed self would have recognized as suicidal. Environmental changes accelerate beyond anything your species has evolved to handle. New predators move into your territory as climate shifts alter migration patterns. Familiar prey species disappear entirely, replaced by animals that don't fit your hunting profile. The very landscape starts changing in ways that eliminate the ambush sites and stalking cover that your hunting strategy depends on. You begin to understand, in whatever way a saber-tooth can understand such things, that you're part of something larger that's falling apart. The abundance that supported your ancestors is disappearing, and the specialized niche that your species carved out is becoming increasingly narrow and unsustainable. Your daily routine becomes an increasingly desperate search for opportunities that are becoming rarer by the season. Each successful hunt feels like a minor miracle, while each failure brings you closer to joining the growing pile of saber-tooth bones that litter the landscape. You're not just hunting for food anymore. You're hunting for the right to exist in a world that's moving on without you. The tragic irony of your situation becomes clear as you mature into your prime years. You're arguably the most impressive predator that ever lived, equipped with weapons that inspire terror and awe in equal measure. But you're also a evolutionary dead end, a magnificent creature whose very magnificence has trapped it in a strategy that worked brilliantly in the past but fails catastrophically in the present. Your legacy becomes not one of dominance and success, but of a beautiful, terrible example of how evolution can paint itself into corners. You're living proof that being the biggest, strongest, and most fearsome doesn't guarantee survival when the rules of the game change faster than you can adapt. The final chapters of your story are written in the growing awareness that each hunt might be your last. Each territory defense might end in catastrophic injury, and each season brings new challenges that your specialized toolkit can't address. You're watching the end of an era from the inside, unable to change course but too magnificent to simply give up. The thing is, you're not even getting the courtesy of a slow decline. The world around you is changing at breakneck speed, and your species is basically trying to run a marathon in concrete boots. Every adaptation that made your ancestors successful is now working against you like some cosmic joke that nobody finds funny. Let's talk about what happens when you finally do find a mate. You think your problems are solved, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Mating season for saber-tooths isn't some romantic nature documentary montage. It's more like a hostile corporate merger, where both parties might literally eat each other if negotiations go south. You've got to convince another apex predator with trust issues and anger management problems to share resources in a world where there aren't enough resources to go around. Your courtship ritual is basically a delicate dance of, I want to mate with you, but also, I might have to kill you if you get too close to my food. Romance is dead, and you helped bury it somewhere in the permafrost. The male saber-tooth courtship strategy involves a lot of cautious circling, threatening displays, and hoping that your potential mate is hungry enough to tolerate your presence, but not so hungry that she decides you'd make a better meal than a partner. Yeah, when you do successfully mate, congratulations. You've just signed up for the most stressful period of your already nightmarish existence. Pregnancy means your mate needs even more food while being less capable of hunting effectively. You're essentially supporting two high-maintenance predators on the hunting skills that were barely keeping one alive. It's like trying to feed a family of four on a part-time job at a gas station, except the gas station is in Antarctica, and your manager is a woolly mammoth with anger issues. The cubs arrive, and suddenly you understand why most saber-toothed parents look like they haven't slept in months. Because they haven't. Those adorable little killing machines require constant attention, protection, and feeding, while being completely incapable of contributing anything useful to the family economy. They can't hunt, they can't defend themselves, and they make noise at the worst possible moments. It's like having furry, fanged alarm clocks that only go off when you're trying to sneak up on prey. Your parenting strategy has to account for the brutal mathematics of saber-tooth survival. Statistically, most of your cubs aren't going to make it to adulthood. This isn't pessimism. It's actuarial science applied to prehistoric carnivores. You have to invest enough energy in each cub to give them a fighting chance while not becoming so attached that their inevitable deaths destroy your ability to keep the survivors alive. Teaching your cubs to hunt becomes an exercise in controlled despair. You're trying to pass on skills that worked in a world that no longer exists, using techniques that are becoming less effective every season. It's like teaching someone to use a typewriter in the age of smartphones, technically still possible, but increasingly irrelevant to the reality they'll face. The first time you take your cubs on a real hunt, you realize just how much the world has changed since your own childhood. The prey animals are smarter, more alert, and better organized than they were when you were learning. Your cubs are trying to master hunting techniques that your grandfather perfected, but they're applying them to targets that have spent generations evolving countermeasures. Your cubs watch you struggle with kills that should be routine, and you can see the confusion in their eyes. They're wondering why Dad, this supposedly apex predator, is having such a hard time with what should be basic saber-tooth activities. You're wondering the same thing, but you can't exactly explain evolutionary dead ends to a 6-month-old cub who's more interested in chasing his own tail than understanding ecological pressures. The family dynamic becomes increasingly strained as resources become scarcer. You and your mate start having the kind of arguments that would make divorce lawyers rich if saber-tooths had legal systems. Who gets to eat first when there's only enough food for one? How do you decide which cubs get the prime portions when there isn't enough to go round? These aren't philosophical questions. They're daily survival decisions that can tear families apart. Your cubs start developing their own personalities and hunting preferences, which should be a proud parental moment, but instead becomes another source of stress. Some of them show promise with the traditional saber-tooth techniques, while others seem naturally inclined toward hunting styles that don't rely on those ridiculous fangs. You're torn between encouraging their natural abilities and trying to force them into the mold that defines your species. The territorial pressures multiply exponentially when you're trying to support a family. Your hunting grounds need to be not just large enough to feed you, but large enough to feed multiple growing predators with increasing appetites. Other saber-tooth families are facing the same pressures, which means territorial disputes become more frequent and more desperate. You're not just fighting for your own survival anymore, you're fighting for your genetic legacy. Winter becomes a special kind of hell when you've got cubs to protect. Adult saber-tooths can survive extended periods without food by burning their own body fat and muscle mass. Cubs can't. They need consistent nutrition or they die, period. You're hunting in conditions that would challenge an experienced adult while trying to keep multiple small predators alive who can't contribute anything to their own survival. The mathematics become impossibly brutal. Each cub needs several pounds of meat per day just to maintain their growth rate. You need your 15 to 20 pounds. Your mate needs her portion. You're looking at feeding requirements that would challenge a small pack of dire wolves. But you're doing it with saber-tooth hunting techniques that require perfect conditions and flawless execution. Your hunting success rate needs to be essentially perfect when you're supporting a family, but the conditions for perfect hunts are becoming increasingly rare. Every missed kill doesn't just mean you go hungry. It means watching your cubs lose weight and vitality while you search desperately for another opportunity that might not come. The stress starts manifesting in ways that would be familiar to any parent, but with prehistoric predator twist. You develop a nervous habit of constantly scanning the horizon for threats or opportunities. Your sleep becomes fragmented as you try to balance rest with vigilance. You start making increasingly desperate decisions as the pressure of keeping multiple lives sustained weighs on your judgment. Your relationship with your mate deteriorates under the constant pressure of resource scarcity. The romantic partnership that started your family becomes a business arrangement focused purely on survival logistics. Who hunts when? Who guards the cubs? Who gets to eat first? These become sources of constant negotiation and conflict. The cubs start showing signs of the same stress that's affecting you. They become more aggressive with each other, more competitive over food, and more likely to take dangerous risks in their play behavior. You're watching your offspring develop the same psychological patterns that are slowly destroying you. And there's nothing you can do to protect them from the reality of their situation. Your territory starts showing signs of overuse from trying to support too many large predators in one area. The prey animals become increasingly wary of your family's hunting grounds. The easy ambush sites get used up quickly, forcing you to venture into areas with better prey, but higher risks from competing predators. The seasonal cycles become even more punishing when you're responsible for multiple lives. Spring means increased competition from other saber-tooth families who survived the winter and are now looking to expand their territories. Summer means the energy demands of raising growing cubs in the heat. Fall means desperately trying to prepare for winter while teaching your cubs skills they'll need to survive on their own. Your cubs reach the age where they need to start learning independence, but the world they're entering is even harsher than the one you grew up in. The prey is scarcer, the competition is fiercer, and the environmental pressures are accelerating. You're essentially preparing them for a world that's actively becoming less hospitable to their species. The first time one of your cubs dies, from starvation, injury, or simple bad luck, you experience a kind of grief that modern animals rarely face. It's not just the loss of offspring, it's the recognition that you're participating in the slow extinction of your own bloodline. Every dead cub represents not just individual tragedy, but species-level failure. Your surviving cubs start showing signs of understanding the brutal reality of their existence. They become more cautious, more calculating, and less willing to take risks. They're developing the same psychological armor that you wear, but they're having to develop it younger and faster than any previous generation of saber-tooths. The family unit starts fragmenting earlier than it should as resources become increasingly scarce. Cubs that should stay with their parents for another season are forced to strike out on their own because the territory can't support them. You're watching your genetic investment walk away into a world that's actively hostile to their survival strategy. Your mate starts showing signs of the same wear and tear that's affecting you. The constant stress of trying to keep cubs alive in impossible conditions takes a toll that goes beyond simple physical exhaustion. Her hunting becomes less precise. Her decision-making becomes more erratic, and her tolerance for the cub's demands decreases noticeably. The realization slowly dawns that you're not raising the next generation of successful saber-tooths. You're raising the last generation. Your cubs are inheriting an ecological niche that's disappearing faster than they can adapt to fill it. Every skill you teach them is becoming obsolete in real time. Your family's hunting strategies start showing signs of desperation that would be obvious to any observer. You're taking risks that your ancestors would have recognized as suicidal, approaching prey in conditions that maximize the chance of injury or failure. But the alternative is watching your family starve. So you take the risks and hope for the best. The cubs start developing hunting preferences that diverge from traditional saber-tooth techniques. Some of them show interest in scavenging. Others seem drawn to smaller prey that doesn't require the precision strikes that define your species. You're torn between encouraging these adaptations and maintaining the genetic heritage that defines what you are. Your territory becomes increasingly contested as other families face the same pressures you're dealing with. The boundaries that once provided clear hunting grounds become fluid battlefields where desperate predators clash over resources that are insufficient for any of them. You're not just competing with other species anymore. You're competing with your own kind for the right to exist. The psychological pressure of watching your species slowly collapse while trying to raise cubs becomes a kind of existential torture that no modern animal experiences. You're simultaneously trying to maintain hope for your offspring while dealing with the growing awareness that their future is probably hopeless. Your cubs reach maturity in a world that's fundamentally different from the one you grew up in, equipped with skills that are increasingly irrelevant to the reality they face. They're magnificent predators trained for a world that no longer exists, carrying genetic heritage that's becoming a liability rather than an asset. The family structure that supported saber-tooth survival for millennia starts breaking down under pressures that no previous generation had to face. Traditional roles become meaningless when the basic assumptions about prey availability and territorial stability no longer apply. Your legacy becomes not one of successful reproduction and genetic continuity, but of bearing witness to the end of an evolutionary experiment. You're raising cubs who will face even worse conditions than you did, equipped with even less suitable tools for the world they're inheriting. The final cruel irony of saber-tooth family life becomes clear as your cubs reach independence. You've successfully raised a generation of magnificent predators for a world that no longer has room for magnificence. They're perfectly adapted for conditions that existed in the past, completely unprepared for the future they're actually going to face. As your cubs finally leave to establish their own territories, you're left with a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief because you no longer have to stretch impossible resources across multiple mouths. Dread because you know exactly what kind of world you've just sent them into. It's like watching someone walk into a burning building while handing them a water gun and wishing them luck. Now, you're back to the grind of solo survival, but your body isn't the machine it used to be. Those years of supporting a family while hunting in increasingly difficult conditions have left their mark. Your joints ache from carrying around all that muscle and weaponry. Your reflexes are a half-second slower than they were in your prime. In the saber-tooth world, a half-second might as well be an eternity. The younger generation of saber-tooths moving into the area aren't just hungrier and more desperate than you were at their age. They're also more willing to challenge established adults for prime territory. They've grown up in conditions so harsh that they've developed a kind of reckless desperation that makes them dangerous opponents. They're not fighting for dominance. They're fighting for the basic right to exist. Your hunting grounds start showing serious signs of ecological stress. The prey animals that remain are the survivors of generations of predation, which means they're the smartest, fastest, and most alert individuals their species has produced. You're essentially trying to hunt the valedictorians of the herbivore world while your own abilities are starting to decline. The mathematics of your existence become increasingly impossible as you age. Your caloric requirements remain roughly the same, but your hunting success rate starts dropping. Every failed hunt becomes more costly because you have fewer reserves to draw on and fewer opportunities to make up for mistakes. It's like trying to maintain a sports car when you can only afford lawnmower parts. Your saber teeth, those magnificent weapons that define your entire identity, start betraying you in ways that would be hilarious if they weren't so tragic. Years of precision strikes have created microscopic stress fractures that you can't see but definitely feel. Every bite becomes a calculated risk that could end your hunting career in a single moment of bad luck. The seasonal cycles that once provided predictable hunting opportunities become increasingly erratic. Climate change is accelerating beyond anything your species has ever experienced, and the environmental cues that guided your ancestors' behavior are becoming unreliable. Spring arrives early, winter lasts longer, and the migration patterns you depend on are shifting in ways that leave you constantly guessing. Your territory, which once seemed like a reasonable hunting ground, starts feeling like a prison. The boundaries that you fought to maintain are becoming meaningless as the prey animals change their behavior patterns. The ambush sites that worked for decades become useless as your targets learn to avoid them. You're playing a game where the rules keep changing, but your strategies remain fixed. The psychological toll of constant failure starts manifesting in ways that would require therapy if Sabertooth had mental health services. You develop a kind of learned helplessness that makes you hesitate at crucial moments. Your confidence, which once allowed you to take down massive prey, starts eroding with each missed opportunity. Your sleep patterns become increasingly disturbed as hunger affects your ability to rest. You find yourself lying awake during the day, conserving energy, while your mind races through increasingly desperate hunting scenarios. When you do sleep, you dream about successful kills that turn into nightmares when you wake up to an empty stomach. The social isolation that defines adult saber-tooth existence becomes even more crushing as you age. You can't form alliances with other predators because you're all competing for the same scarce resources. You can't rely on family bonds because everyone's fighting for their own survival. You're essentially playing a solo game in a world that increasingly rewards cooperation. Your body starts cannibalizing itself during extended periods without food. The massive muscles that make you such an effective hunter become liabilities when you can't find enough protein to maintain them. You're literally eating yourself from the inside out, trading tomorrow's hunting ability for today's survival. The prey animals in your territory start showing signs of evolutionary pressure that work directly against your hunting strategy. They're becoming more alert, more likely to travel in groups, and better at detecting saber-tooth scent from greater distances. It's like they're all taking advanced courses in saber-tooth avoidance while you're stuck using the same textbook your grandfather used. Your hunting technique, which once seemed like the pinnacle of predatory evolution, starts feeling increasingly antiquated. You watch smaller, more adaptable predators succeed with strategies that would never work for you. They're playing jazz while you're stuck performing classical compositions that nobody wants to hear anymore. The weather patterns that once provided hunting opportunities start working against you consistently. The storms that used to drive prey into sheltered areas where you could ambush them now seem to drive them away from your territory entirely. The seasonal temperature changes that once made your prey sluggish and predictable now seem to make them more alert and difficult to approach. Your scent-marking behavior, which once effectively communicated territorial boundaries to other saber-tooths, becomes increasingly pointless as the population density drops. You're essentially leaving messages for an audience that's disappearing faster than you can maintain the communication network. The stress of constant hunger starts affecting your decision-making in ways that create dangerous feedback loops. You become more likely to take risks that could result in injury, but injury while hunting alone means almost certain death. You're gambling with your life every time you approach prey. But not gambling means starving slowly. Your grooming behavior, which once served important social and health functions, becomes a luxury you can barely afford. The energy spent on maintaining your coat and cleaning your teeth could be better used hunting, but neglecting your appearance affects your hunting efficiency. It's a catch-22 that would drive a philosopher to drink. The territorial disputes with younger saber-tooths become increasingly one-sided as your physical condition deteriorates. You're fighting with the experience of age against the desperation of youth, and desperation is proving to be a more powerful motivator than wisdom. Your memory starts playing tricks on you as hunger affects your cognitive function. You remember successful hunting spots from years ago and waste precious energy traveling to locations where the prey patterns have changed completely. You're hunting ghosts in territories that exist only in your increasingly unreliable recollections. The environmental changes accelerate to the point where you can observe them happening in real time. Species that were abundant in your youth disappear entirely within a few seasons. New predators move into your area as climate shifts alter migration routes. The very landscape starts changing in ways that eliminate the geographical features your hunting strategy depends on. Your daily routine becomes an increasingly desperate search for opportunities that are becoming rarer by the week. Each successful hunt feels like winning the lottery, while each failure brings you measurably closer to joining the growing number of saber-tooth skeletons that mark failed attempts at survival. The younger saber-tooths you encounter start showing adaptations that would have been unthinkable in your generation. Some of them are developing hunting strategies that don't rely heavily on those massive canine teeth. Others are showing increased tolerance for scavenging behavior that your generation would have considered beneath their dignity. Your species' reputation as apex predators becomes increasingly meaningless as the definition of success shifts toward adaptability rather than raw power. You're the evolutionary equivalent of a heavyweight boxer in a world that's moved on to mixed martial arts. Impressive within your specialty, but increasingly irrelevant to the actual competition. The realization slowly dawns that you're not just witnessing the end of your own life, but the end of your entire evolutionary lineage. Every failed hunt is evidence of a species-wide failure to adapt to changing conditions. Every successful kill feels like a temporary reprieve from an inevitable verdict. Your legacy becomes not one of predatory excellence, but of magnificent obsolescence. You're living proof that evolution doesn't always reward the biggest, strongest, or most fearsome. Sometimes it rewards the most adaptable, and adaptability was never your species' strong suit. The final chapters of your existence are written in the growing awareness that each day might be your last, not because of old age or disease, but because of simple ecological mathematics. You're a remainder in an equation that no longer balances, a beautiful mistake in nature's accounting that's finally being corrected. Your story becomes a testament to the cruel irony of evolutionary specialization. You're perfectly adapted for a world that no longer exists, magnificently equipped for challenges that are no longer relevant, supremely evolved for an ecological niche that's disappearing beneath your feet. The world moves on without you, not because you failed as an individual, but because you succeeded too well as a species. Your ancestors were so good at being saber-tooths that they locked your entire lineage into a strategy that worked brilliantly in the past but fails catastrophically in the present. And somewhere in the distance, carried on winds that smell of change and uncertainty, you catch the scent of something new moving through your territory, something that walks upright and carries tools and hunts in ways that make no sense to your predator's mind, something that will outlast your species, not because it's stronger or more fearsome, but because it's endlessly, terrifyingly adaptable. You don't know it yet, but you're about to meet the future, and the future doesn't have room for magnificent predators who can't change with the times. The encounter happens on an ordinary day that becomes extraordinary in the worst possible way. You're tracking what might be your last decent meal in weeks. A lone ground sloth that's wandered away from its herd. Your stomach is eating itself from the inside, your vision is slightly blurry from hunger, and your famous saber teeth feel heavier than they should. This kill needs to happen, or you're looking at a slow, undignified death by starvation. You've positioned yourself perfectly downwind using every technique your father taught you and your grandfather taught him. The approach is textbook saber-tooth, patient, precise, and calculated for that one perfect strike. You're about to demonstrate why your species ruled the Ice Age for millions of years. That's when you notice them. At first, they don't look like much of anything. Certainly not like predators. They're smaller than you, obviously weaker, and they move with none of the fluid grace that marks a proper hunter. They're walking upright on two legs like some kind of evolutionary mistake, chattering to each other in sounds that don't resemble any communication system you understand. But something about them makes your predator instincts start screaming warnings that your rational mind can't quite process. They move together in a coordinated way that reminds you of pack hunters, but without the obvious hierarchy and body language that defines normal pack behavior. They're carrying objects that extend their reach in ways that don't make sense from a natural weapon's perspective. You make your first mistake by hesitating. In the saber-tooth world, hesitation kills, but these strange creatures are so far outside your evolutionary experience that your brain needs a moment to process what you're seeing. That moment of confusion costs you the element of surprise and probably your life. One of them notices you crouched in your ambush position and makes a sound that brings the attention of the others. They don't scatter like proper prey animals should. They don't freeze like animals caught between fight and flight responses. Instead, they start moving in ways that suggest they're treating you like a problem to be solved rather than a force of nature to be feared. Your second mistake is assuming that their small size and apparent physical weakness mean they're not a threat. You've spent your entire life at the top of the food chain, and the concept of being threatened by something smaller than yourself simply doesn't compute. You're a saber-toothed tiger, for crying out loud. These things look like they'd have trouble taking down a rabbit. But then one of them raises one of those extended objects they're carrying, and you realize with growing horror that they've just increased their effective reach to something approaching your own saber-tooth range. Worse, they're doing it without putting themselves at risk of the kind of catastrophic dental failure that haunts every saber-tooth's nightmares. The coordination of their movement becomes more apparent as they spread out in a formation that's clearly designed to cut off your escape routes. This isn't random behavior or panic response. They're implementing a strategy that they've obviously used before, and they're implementing it with the kind of calm efficiency that you associate with experienced predators. Your third mistake is trying to use intimidation tactics that work on normal prey animals. You rear up to your full height, expose those magnificent saber teeth, and let out a roar that would send a mammoth running for the hills. The effect on these strange creatures is approximately zero. If anything, they seem more focused and determined after your display. That's when you realize you're not dealing with prey animals at all. These are predators, just predators who've evolved along completely different lines than anything in your experience. They're pack hunters who figured out how to extend their natural weapons and coordinate their attacks in ways that make your individual excellence irrelevant. The first projectile whistles past your ear close enough that you can feel the air displacement. Your brain takes another precious moment to process what just happened. Something just tried to hurt you from a distance greater than your natural weapons can reach. This violates every rule of predator-prey interaction that you understand. Your fourth and final mistake is running directly away from them instead of using the kind of evasive maneuvering that might have given you chance. But your predator's mind is still trying to process these creatures as prey animals, and the idea of using anti-predator tactics against something so obviously inferior is too foreign for you to consider quickly enough. The chase that follows is unlike anything in your evolutionary experience. You're faster in a straight line, but they're persistent in ways that don't make sense. Normal predators give up when the energy cost of pursuit exceeds the likely caloric gain from success. These things keep coming with the kind of determination that suggests they're not hunting for food at all. More projectiles fly past you as you run, some coming close enough to convince you that this isn't random throwing, but aimed attacks from creatures who've practiced this kind of hunting. They're not just lucky. They're skilled in ways that your species never needed to develop because your weapons were always attached to your body. Your stamina, which should be your advantage in this situation, starts failing you faster than it should because you're already weakened from hunger and the stress of constant survival pressure. These creatures, meanwhile, seem to have energy reserves that suggest they're not living on the edge of starvation like every other predator in your ecosystem. The realization hits you with the force of a mammoth charge. You're not just being hunted by another species. You're being hunted by a species that's figured out how to hunt apex predators. They're not competing with you for the same ecological niche. They're eliminating you from the competition entirely. Your legendary saber teeth, those magnificent weapons that defined your entire evolutionary strategy, become useless appendages that throw off your balance as you run. The specialization that made your species dominant for millions of years is now working against you in ways that would be ironic if they weren't so terrifying. The landscape you know so well starts working against you as these creatures demonstrate an understanding of terrain and tactical positioning that rivals your own. They're not just chasing you. They're herding you toward areas where their projectile weapons will be more effective and your escape options will be more limited. Your breathing becomes labored not just from the physical exertion of running, but from the psychological shock of finding yourself in the position of prey for the first time in your adult life. The role reversal is so complete and so sudden that your mind struggles to adapt to the new reality. The pack coordination of these creatures becomes more evident as the chase continues. They're communicating with each other in ways that allow them to adjust their strategy in real time, cutting off escape routes and maintaining pressure without allowing you time to recover or regroup. Your species' solitary hunting strategy, which worked perfectly when you were the one doing the hunting, becomes a fatal weakness when you're the one being hunted. There's no pack of your own kind coming to your rescue, no allies to call upon, no backup plan for dealing with predators who hunt apex predators. The projectiles become more accurate as the chase continues, suggesting that these creatures are learning your movement patterns and adjusting their aim accordingly. They're not just persistent, they're adaptive in ways that allow them to improve their performance in real time. Your familiarity with your territory, which should be giving you advantages in terms of escape routes and hiding places, becomes meaningless when your pursuers demonstrate the ability to flush you out of cover with their ranged weapons. Every advantage you thought you had is being systematically neutralized. The energy cost of this chase starts exceeding anything your body can sustain, given your already depleted condition. You're burning through reserves that you don't have, borrowing against a future that's looking increasingly unlikely to arrive. Your predator's instincts, which have served you well throughout your life, start providing advice that's completely inappropriate for your current situation. Everything your brain is telling you to do is based on being the hunter rather than the hunted, and the role reversal is happening too quickly for you to adapt. The sounds of pursuit behind you change in ways that suggest your pursuers are gaining confidence and possibly closing distance. The coordination of their calls and signals indicates a level of tactical sophistication that you've never encountered in any other species. Your vision starts narrowing from the combination of exhaustion, hunger, and sheer terror. The tunnel vision that once helped you focus on prey is now preventing you from seeing potential escape routes or changes in your pursuer's strategy. The realization dawns that you're not just experiencing your own personal doom, but witnessing the arrival of something that will make your entire species obsolete. These creatures represent a completely different approach to predations, one that doesn't require the massive physical adaptations that locked your evolutionary lineage into an increasingly narrow niche. Your legendary status as an apex predator dissolves in real time as you find yourself reduced to the role of prey animal, trying desperately to escape hunters who've figured out how to hunt the hunters. The food chain that you thought you sat atop turns out to have another level that you never knew existed. The chase ends not with the kind of dramatic confrontation that would make for good storytelling, but with simple exhaustion and the growing awareness that continued flight is only delaying an inevitable conclusion. You're not going to outrun these creatures, and you're not equipped to fight them on their terms. Your final moments as a saber-tooth are spent understanding, in whatever way a saber-tooth can understand such things, that you've just encountered the future of predation on this planet. And that future doesn't include magnificent specialized killing machines who can't adapt fast enough to survive in a world that's changing at unprecedented speed. The last thing you see before the final projectile finds its mark is the coordinated efficiency of creatures who've figured out how to make individual excellence irrelevant through collective action and technological extension of their natural abilities. You're dying not because you failed as a saber-tooth, but because being a perfect saber-tooth is no longer enough in a world where the rules of survival have fundamentally changed. Your species' magnificent run as the apex predators of the Ice Age ends not with a whimper, but with the whistle of projectiles fired by creatures who represent everything your evolutionary strategy couldn't account for: adaptability, cooperation, and the ability to change tactics faster than your opponents can adapt to them. The future belongs to the flexible, and flexibility was never your strong suit. Your death isn't just the end of your individual story, it's a preview of coming attractions for your entire species. As your vision fades and your massive body hits the frozen ground with a thud that would make lesser predators weep, those strange upright creatures are already moving with the kind of casual efficiency that speaks to countless similar encounters. They're not celebrating your death like normal predators would. There's no victory roar, no territorial display, no ritualistic consumption of their defeated enemy. Instead, they're treating your magnificent corpse like a resource to be processed, examining your saber teeth with the kind of clinical interest that suggests they've seen plenty of your kind before. What you couldn't have known in your final moments is that you've just become a statistic in the greatest mass extinction event since the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Except this time, the asteroid walks on 2 legs and carries pointed sticks. Your species isn't dying out due to climate change or natural selection. You're being systematically eliminated by creatures who figured out that apex predators make excellent hunting practice. So there you have it, the complete nightmare that was being born as a saber-toothed tiger. From your first blind, helpless moments in a freezing cave to your final desperate flight from humanity's hunting parties, every single day was a master class in evolutionary failure. You were magnificent, terrifying, and perfectly adapted for a world that was disappearing faster than your species could change. Those iconic fangs that made you famous weren't symbols of power.